Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Olga Bloch, and I will be your presenter today. This evening, I would like to sincerely thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight. I know that we all have really busy lives, we all have kids, we all have responsibilities, we all get really tired. So thank you so much for coming and providing me with the opportunity to share with you what is truly and genuinely my passion. And my passion is to help parents transform their relationships with their kids. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am in practice in Rockville, Maryland, and I see individuals, I see couples, I see families. I work with a variety of different kinds of people with different kinds of concerns, issues. I also speak in different elementary schools, high schools, and middle schools. So it really is genuinely my pleasure to be here this evening and to share this information with you. Just a few things that I want to share before we get started. One, I am videotaping the workshop. All of your faces are anonymous. I videotape workshops just to help parents. If they have questions or if they want to watch it again, it's available online. You can just email me and I'll be happy to give you the password if you'd like to watch it again. It's free of charge. And this is just a way for me to give back to the community, because I genuinely believe that parenting is very similar to going to the gym. Right? You can go once, you feel really good, but if you really want to make long-lasting changes, it's got to be an ongoing thing. And sometimes we don't want to. And sometimes we don't feel like it. And sometimes we get really tired. And sometimes it's just easier to do it in a way that we don't really have to think. And so my overall goal for my profession is to help people gain awareness in how to change their relationship with their kids. So a challenge that I have, that I invite each and every one of you to join me in, is that I have 1 hour to share with you information that my goal is that you will leave here and you will actually do something different with your child. And by doing something different is to enhance, change, modify, but create a deeper connection with your child. And so my request is at the end of the workshop, I will ask you if you feel that you've gotten at least one thing that you can do differently. So what this workshop is about is not necessarily to give you a list of things to do differently, because all of us have enough to do on our plate as it is, right? Like, you don't need more stuff for you to do. The premise for tonight is, how is it that you can create the most optimal condition so your child can learn how to control themselves? So in creating the most optimal condition, the responsibility for self-control is on them, not on you, right? Because oftentimes as parents, we take on such responsibility, we take on so many things that we want our children to behave a certain way. And that's a really slippery slope to fall into, because then it creates a lot of power struggles, push and pull. Why won't my child listen? And so we'll go step by step. I do ask questions. You're more than welcome to answer them, to participate. If I don't get answers, I'll answer them myself, so it'll look like I'm talking to myself, which is totally okay. So we just kind of play it by ear and go right along. So that's my introduction. So let me go here. Okay, so what are your expectations? Right, I'm going to start off with expectations, because expectations is kind of like where relationships begin. We have this idea that once our child is born, we have these expectations for them. We'd like them to be cooperative. We'd like them to be responsible. We'd like them to be kind. We'd like them to be open to sharing. We'd like them to be flexible, to be patient, and to be understanding, right? Like, these are all like virtues that we would love our children to have. Now, the difficult part here is that a lot of times we don't possess these qualities ourselves. So when we don't have them, it's kind of difficult for us to teach them. And there, hence comes the expectation, right? Like, if I can't do it, my child is going to do what I cannot do. Now, this happens, sometimes it's conscious, and sometimes it's not at a conscious level. But we have expectations. So, what happens when these expectations are not met? Right? So, the higher our expectations, usually, the more intensely, if you can't see, I'll move over this way. We feel angry, we feel sad, we feel disappointed, we feel overwhelmed, we feel like we failed. So next time I'm going to just try harder. I need to do more of this. I need to be stricter. I need to give out stronger consequences. I need to remind more. Or maybe I need to be less. Maybe I should lower my expectations. Maybe I should let them go. So we begin to create this whole negotiation in our minds as to how we're going to do this differently, because whatever we did before didn't work because our expectations were not met. So we do not like these feelings. And so when we don't like the feelings that we're feeling, what is it that we do? We don't do them anymore. Right? Like, we feel uncomfortable, so we're going to stop. Because internally, we are creatures of comfort. We're constantly looking for ways to be more comfortable, whether it be more comfortable in our cars, or more comfortable on our couches, or more comfortable with our TVs, or more comfortable in whatever it is. We're creatures of comfort. We like comfort. So whatever makes us feel uncomfortable, we have a tendency of shying away from, which makes parenting hard, because parenting is a lot of times about doing things that make us feel uncomfortable. We need to create rules and boundaries and do things that oftentimes we don't want to do and push ourselves. And so it really becomes a challenge in how is it that we deal with these uncomfortable feelings. So what we do is we try to control these uncomfortable feelings from happening, right? So how is it that we're going to try to make sure that these uncomfortable feelings don't happen again? So if I have expectations and my child doesn't meet my expectations and I get upset, let's see how we're going to keep that from happening again. So we start, oh, excellent.
I see if you work.
Hello? Oh, great. Thank you. Hello? Okay. So we remind, let me make sure I remind him. Right? I don't want to be disappointed that he forgot his homework, or I don't want to get another call from the teacher. I don't want to make sure that he or she doesn't do what she's supposed to, so I'll make sure that I'll remind and remind and remind. We cajole, please, let me prepare you. If I tell you ahead of time, maybe you'll do it. If I make sure that I plead with you, or I bargain with you, or I prepare you, or if I do it for you. These are all ways that we try to support our kids into doing the things that we expect them to do, right? Sometimes we get so frustrated that we distance. I don't know how to deal with you. I don't know what else to do. Just please, I need some space. Sometimes we punish them, right? Like, if you don't watch TV, then maybe you won't hit your brother. Sometimes we try to make it easier by lowering the expectations. We avoid the situation altogether. Or we use guilt, or we threaten. If you do this again, you're going to make sure that, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. So we come up with little tactics to kind of get our kids to listen to us and to do what we say, to meet our expectations. So since tonight's talk is about self-control, let's identify what are the different kinds of self-control. Right? So there's impulse control that can be constituted as self-control. Like, for example, can you wait for gratification? Do you have the ability to calm yourself down enough to wait for whatever reward is going to happen further down the road, whether it be later on that day, whether it be the next day? Like, can you put in the hard work now so you get the gratification later? Then there's physical self-control. Can you control yourself when you get angry and stop yourself from punching another child? There's emotional self-control. When you get upset, Can you control the words that come out of your mouth? Can you stop yourself from saying things that might be hurtful? Can you control the tone of your voice? Can you control the things you say? And then focus is another way of self-control. Like, can you focus on a task long enough to be able to absorb the information and also understand what's being shared, right? So these are all like different aspects of self-control. Now, as I said earlier, today's talk is not necessarily about you imparting the self-control to your child, but it is about teaching them how to control themselves. So when do we lack self-control? Self-control is something that happens in the higher learning part of your brain, right? So your theoretical brain, this is not like your anatomical brain, like the brain that really exists inside your head, but theoretically, your brain is divided into 3 different sections, which is the animal section is your reactive section. That's the part of you that looks for safety. The limbic section is the part that is looking for emotional connection. And your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain where you use your higher thinking and your higher learning, right? So self-control usually happens in your prefrontal cortex. However, if at any moment you feel threatened and you do not feel safe, that is when your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you go down into your animal brain, which is your reactive brain, and so there is no thought there. There is no thinking. That's why oftentimes parents say, I try to reason with my child and they don't listen, or I can't seem to get the information in there. It's because the other parts of their brain are shut down. So when do we lack self-control? When we don't feel safe. So bottom line, the first step in helping your child with self-control is they must feel safe. Now, oftentimes kids have a hard time even understanding that they don't feel safe, because it's not about physical safety. I mean, it might be, but it's much more about emotional safety. Is it okay for them to feel the way that they feel? Is it okay for them to express anger? So then your job as parents is to teach them a different way to share how they feel. Now, oftentimes, we are not okay with that. Oftentimes, we have our own triggers based on our own childhood that take us to a place that's not safe. And so then when we don't feel safe, guess what we do? We don't have self-control either, right? Because we go to that animal brain that just reacts, that part of your brain that doesn't use logic. This happens to everybody, not just a few people. It's just the ability to be able to create emotional safety through relationships. But oftentimes we don't know how to do that. Why don't we know how to do that? We don't know how to do that because we're busy, because we're tired, because we're overwhelmed, and because of our dear friend, our expectations. Your expectations will always get you, because in the back of our minds, what we expect to happen is so much greater than what could actually happen in reality, in real time. I heard a quote, I think it was Bill Gates who said it, that people overestimate what they can accomplish in 2 years, and then they underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. So our expectations usually are very present time focused, and we have a hard time utilizing the necessary time to teach the skills that we need to teach in the long run. So self-control is something that goes through developmental stages. Children can understand self-control differently at different ages. So how do we create emotional safety so your child can feel connected and can learn? Because once they feel emotionally safe, then that 3 parts of your brain begins to build on each other, which is the animal part of your brain feels safe Then you go into your limbic brain, which is your emotional brain. How is it that you create connection? How is it that you create a sense of acceptance so your child can learn? Once the emotional brain is connected, then they can go on to the prefrontal cortex and begin to learn different strategies. So ways to create emotional safety. Connection, eye contact. Eye contact is one of the most important things to create emotional connection. If you notice, when you're upset with someone, it's very difficult for you to look at them in the eye. If you trust them, you can look at them in the eye. So kids, if they are upset, embarrassed, anxious, worried, ashamed, sad, you can pretty much put any emotion in there that brings them down. They will look down. They have a hard time looking in the eye, in your eyes. The key is once you create eye contact, that's the beginning of getting them to come out. Now, you need to be in a place where you feel emotionally safe too. Because if you're like, look at me in the eye, right? That's not gonna work. That actually backfires, right? So I have 3 kids, right? I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And I've read many, many parenting books. As I said, this is my passion. And so in one parenting book, it said, do not redirect or punish or talk to your child unless you can think of like 3 nice things about them. Right? And so like I remember going up the stairs and I'm like, I like his eyes and he's a nice boy, right? But emotionally, I just wasn't there, right? So I needed more time. But again, my expectation of myself is that I should go up there and I should make it better, right? So oftentimes our way to go make it better is like, let me clarify my point to you, right? Let me make it clear so you can understand what I meant when I lost it a few minutes ago, right? So it's not about that either. So creating connection, eye contact to slow down. This is extremely difficult in today's world. Now, if you want to know the reason why relationships fall apart is because we are moving at such a fast pace that we are completely disconnected from our own feelings. And so slowing down is one of the most important things that you can do, not only for your child, but for yourself. Now, what I mean by slowing down is, obviously the thing would be, the other person would be like, well, I can't, I have kids and I have a job and I've got to make dinner and I've got to do this and I have so many responsibilities and da-da-da-da-da. It's not about you slowing down that you become like this Zen Buddhist meditation person in the middle of your living room while you're cooking dinner. It's not about that. It's about having enough presence to just take a deep breath in. It's about having enough presence that in moments of connection, you are actually connected. Not that you are, in moments of connection, attempting to navigate through these moments so you can go and do the 7 million other things you gotta do, right? So what happens is, in our world that there is more information, it's faster, we have better ways of communicating with others, we are more connected to people around the world than we've ever been. We have never felt more alone. And that is what we end up teaching our kids. Because, for example, the way that we've taught our kids self-control, and I will be the first one to say that I do this, is to give them an iPad, or to give them a toy, or to give them something to entertain themselves. Right? And so what we're doing is we are creating a generation of kids that do soothe themselves, but they're totally disconnected. They don't know what that's like. They don't even know how to do it. And then a very common problem that I see in my practice is my kid has a hard time making friends. And because when they're out in the playground, it's like there's this void that every child is thinking for themselves, because there's a bunch of individuals that are in the playground and they're not playing together, but they're in a group thinking as individuals. Okay? So the slowing down piece is extremely important in terms of having mindfulness, that even if you slow down for 1 minute, it refuels your connection to yourself and it refuels your relationship with your child. Deep breaths. This goes into the slowing down. And doing deep breaths with kids is also very, very powerful. Feeling understood. Okay. Okay. This is vitally important. Because if you notice, in every argument that we ever have, the only thing that we want is to feel understood. And we will dig our heels, and we'll stomp our feet, and we will pout, and we will repeat ourselves, and we will write it down, or we'll say it nicely, or whatever, but we have a fundamental need to feel understood. Now, as parents, we oftentimes believe that if we understand our child, it means that we are agreeing with them. And those two things are separate. I can understand you. I don't necessarily have to agree with you. And how is it that we're going to begin to have conversations about, I can understand why you did that. I can understand that you're upset. I can understand that this is difficult. How is it that we're going to do it differently? Right? So the validation component is kind of like the cushion that makes relationships work. Unless people feel understood, they will dig their heels in deeper. And then that's when behavior begins to escalate. Okay, so bottom line, if we put all of these things together, it's about relaxing the tension in the relationship, right? So as human beings, we have a tendency to either upregulate if we get stressed, and the way that we have learned how to downregulate is through control. Now, there's a limitation to that because we cannot control everything. Right? So a big difference between us and animals is that animals adapt to their environment. We expect our environment to adapt to us. And that expectation to have the environment adapt to us has made us very emotionally fragile. Because the more adaptable we are to our environment, the healthier our relationships are. Relationships are about a back and forth. How is it that I can create a nice and easy back and forth between my child, between my marriage, between relationships that matter to me? Okay, opportunity for growth. So when your child lacks self-control, they either throw a temper tantrum, or they hit another child at school, or they got in a fight with their brother, or they ate the cookies that you asked them to wait for after dinner, right? If they are lacking self-control, one of the questions is, whose responsibility is it? Now, if we're at home, we might feel a lot safer to put the responsibility of the self-control on them, right? Because we're at home. But if maybe it's in a place that's in public, like for example, if you got called into the school, right, and there's other people that are watching, and then all of a sudden in the back of your head, it's just like, oh my God, I'm a bad mom because my child did this, right? We begin to take ownership for their misbehavior. Or this is usually a good one, if like your in-laws are over or your own mother is over and she's like watching the way that you're parenting, right? Like those might be triggers for you, right? We begin to take on the responsibility. Right? Because again, it goes back to that thing of control. If I have more control, then this will not happen again. So what I really want you guys to begin to look at is, what is the dynamics that happens underneath the choices that we make when we teach our kids? So can you be with the space that exists between you and your child's responsibility? And what I mean by that is, there is a space that your child is learning how to be responsible. Your child is learning about self-control. Your child is learning how to articulate how they feel. Your child is learning how to coexist with their environment and with the demands of school and friends, right? They're going through this learning process. How comfortable are you with their learning curve? Now, I can tell you for me, with my 14-year-old, I am not comfortable at all. My expectations, going back to the beginning, they usually were right on top of him. He's my first son, he needs to know, he needs to do things this way, he's the oldest, he should know better, right? Like my expectations were like all over him. Now with my youngest child, now I'm a much more seasoned parent, I still have the same expectations. It's not that I'm letting her off the hook. They just don't have the same pointy feel to them. They're not so rigid, they're not so stiff. There's more room for her to learn and grow and make mistakes, right? So with each child, we begin to have a perception of like how they are. Well, you know, Johnny has a terrible temper, so I just know that he's going to do whatever. So we begin to create the space for them to behave a certain way. And then there's the other way, which is some children may lack self-control, but because they have like a good rap, like they're a good student or they get along with other kids, it's more forgiving because you didn't expect that to happen, right? So we have different relationships with each one of our kids. So the key here is to begin to remove that so you can actually create a connection with them and be present to what are their struggles. And is it okay that they struggle with this? Right? So with my 14-year-old son, I really like things to be organized. Like I like organization. And not only that, I loved school. I was a good student. I loved homework. I liked school. My oldest son hates it. He doesn't like it. His homework's messy, his handwriting is awful, his backpack is a mess, and I cannot tell you how much that used to drive me crazy. I was like a lunatic because I'm like, how can this be? It cannot be this way, right? And so then the only thing I ended up doing was pushing him further away, creating a greater rift. He listened to me a lot less, and you think my screaming and yelling got him to like school anymore? No. So then what he started doing, like in 5th and 6th grade, is that he would lie to me about his schoolwork because he didn't want to get yelled at, which makes perfect sense, right? The part of being understood, I'm like, I can understand that. I have a hard time being with your mess. I need to unplug that, and I need to look at your mess and say, your mess is yours. Your mess is not my mess. Like, I cannot yell at you enough to make you neat. You are messy. So if you want to deal with your mess, I'll be happy to help you deal with it. I can help you put structure in dealing with it, but I cannot be responsible for your mess, right? So with self-control, we can just scratch out the word mess and put self-control in there. You cannot be responsible for how your child behaves. If you go down that lion's den, you will not come out alive. The only thing that will perish is your relationship with your child, because at the end of the day, you will be right. You'll be right, but you will never have the kind of relationship with your child that you want to have. So I actually had a very clear and honest conversation with my son, and I said, you know something? I do care that you're messy, and I do care about your grades, but I care about our relationship more. So I'm not going to jeopardize our relationship for anything in this world. When I started taking that stance, things began to dramatically change, because the responsibility fell on him, and I became a lot less reactive to how he behaved. Okay, so identify the problem and focus on the problem, not the person, right? So if the problem is getting along with other kids, if the problem is, does he have a hard time, does she have a hard time identifying how she feels, right? So my daughter, who's 9, she thinks that she's the boss of everything and she knows the answer to everything, right? So the problem is not her personality. The problem is that she doesn't know how to ask for what she needs. She just goes and takes it. right? So I could sit there and say, make her feel like there's something wrong with her, or I can help her learn how to ask for what she wants. Now that takes patience. But I am not triggered by people who have strong personalities. I'm triggered by messy people, right? Like, we have different triggers. My husband, on the other hand, gets very triggered by her bossy personality. So what is the difference between blame and responsibility? This is really slippery slope. And this also has a tremendous impact on the quality of your relationship. When you complain, and when you put that your misery is on somebody else, that's blame. If only you behaved a certain way, I wouldn't get upset. I gotta tell you, I've written like albums on the blame song, right? Because not only that, I'm super smart at constructing the reality that creates blame on the other person, right? And as long as the other person is square away with all the blame, then my life is just great because I'm perfect, right? Not only am I perfect, I'm really likable and I'm super nice and I try my best each and every day, so there's nothing wrong with me. It's all you guys' fault. And if only you would help me, and if only you were more organized, and only you shared with your sister, and if only my husband came home early from work, and if only, and if only, and if only, then I would be happy. And you know what ends up happening is all of those things someday may magically align, and you'll still be miserable because you're not being responsible for your own happiness. So the difference is responsibility is, how can I look at this as an opportunity for growth and for change? Or am I going to look at this as another way for me to blame somebody else? Okay. So how not to do it? Okay. So true self-control. If you really want your child to learn how to control themselves, it cannot be taught by threats, punishments, bribes, guilt, fear, manipulation, and then the question is, why not? Why not? It works. It works. It gets me to get them to do what I want them to do. The reason why it doesn't work is that self-control is about that very word, self. And the thing is, the trick is you gotta be able to teach them how to go inside themselves. And that going inside yourself is safe. And that going inside yourself is okay. But we can spend tons of energy avoiding going inside ourselves. We do that blame game. We point the fingers at other people. We don't talk about how we feel. We just pretend like everything is just fine. What's the point of going inside yourself anyway? Who cares? Why go there? Because inside yourself is the glue that makes relationships work. Inside yourself is where the motivation for you to discover your passion for your work and for your life, that's where it emanates from. Inside yourself is where you choose the person that you're going to marry. Inside yourself lives the most major decisions that will happen, whether your child will use drugs or not, lives inside yourself. So until we get comfortable teaching our kids to go inside themselves, you will always be trying to control them. And so then you can threaten and punish and bribe and guilt and fear and manipulate them all you want, because then they just will do what you want. And then when you're not around, they just will do whatever somebody else wants them to do anyway. Right? And so it's not about that. Now, to teach your child to go inside themselves, we need to be willing to go inside ourselves as well. Right? And so then the conversation becomes very different. It's not necessarily about what happened, but it becomes about how they felt. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit. So why not? Okay, self-control must come from within. How to create this? So create emotional safety first. If you can't because you're too upset, then drop it until you can. There is nothing that needs to be addressed immediately. Nothing. Nothing on this planet that needs to be addressed in a moment where you feel that your rage is going to get the point across. It doesn't work. Like when I'm going up those stairs, that's me just being really hard on myself because I feel that if I'm a good mother, I'm gonna solve it now. And this is gonna end now. And it's never gonna happen again. Because you know something? I'm a good mother, right? It doesn't have to be like that. Consistency. Now this is a really tricky one because consistency is a word that has been used tirelessly in parenting, right? And consistency also has the experience, at least for me, of like robotic. And I am not robotic, and I am not consistent, and I have lots of emotions, and my emotions go up and they go down and they go all around the block, and I'm expressive, and I just will do the best I can. Consistency is not about being perfect. Consistency is about remaining open. Because what happens is, when we get upset with our kids, we know that we love them unconditionally. We know that they are the most important relationships in our lives. We know this. They don't know that. And so we know that our love is unconditional. They don't know that. So the part of consistency is to create a consistent connection, not perfect, that even if you get upset, they can understand that you still love them. Because what happens is when they begin to doubt or question that you love them because how much you've gotten upset with them, what happens, it goes like this. Like you love them, the door is open, and they receive it. You get angry and upset, the door is closed, they're afraid, and they shut down. And then you apologize, or you make up, or days go by, or whatever happens, and then the door is open again. And then the door is shut, and then the door is open, and then the door is shut. And what happens with that, hello? And what happens with that opening and shutting is they begin to feel immune to the love that you give. So if you ever experience that your kids never have enough, or they always want more, or like you take them someplace and they're like more, why? And you're like, why aren't you grateful? Right? Like, why can't you appreciate the stuff that you have? Right? I never had any of this stuff, or I never went and did all these wonderful things. Your dad and I are wonderful parents to you. We take you to these places, we take you to these nice restaurants, we've gone on these great vacations. You're so ungrateful and selfish. Right? And this is like rampant nowadays, rampant. Why? Because things are accessible, because things are for a variety of different reasons. But the reason why that is because the connection between the parents is frail, not between the parents themselves, but between the parent and the children is frail, it's brittle. There's no consistency there. Not because you don't love your kids, because I know you guys love your kids or else you wouldn't be here tonight, right? And I'm not saying the people that aren't here don't love their kids. Don't get me wrong. Don't go there. But what I'm saying is you care deeply about your children. Your relationship is important. They oftentimes may not get that. They don't get that we get upset with them because we care. They don't think that. Right? And so this is where the consistency is really important, is to create the consistency in the connection. Unconditional acceptance for mistakes. This is a hard one, right? Can we be okay with the fact that they make mistakes? So if we're not okay with the fact that they make mistakes, then what happens is they begin to hide them, they begin to make excuses, there's no opportunity for learning. If you have a hard time with the mistakes that they make, then take ownership for that. It's really hard for me to see you make mistakes, I'm gonna confess. I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time seeing that you're getting, I don't know, a bad grade when I know that you can do better. It's difficult for me. But even as you acknowledge that that's difficult for you, you're not just putting it all on them. Right? Because the object of the game is, how is it that my child can be next to me and whatever problem or mistake that they made is over there? Usually what we do is I'm over here, the mistake is right here in between us, and then my child is on the other side. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that mistake onto them, and it's just like it was your fault. Right? So it's just like they're left over there with the mistake, and it's just like you need to deal with this. You need to solve this on your own. The object of the game is bring your child next to you and deal with the mistake together. How are we going to solve this together? So put words to feeling. What were you feeling before you lost your temper? What were you feeling before this happened? Help them identify what's difficult for them. Oftentimes, if we can identify our own feelings before we lose self-control, that's also really helpful, because then you can get present to what is it that you need before you get angry or do something that you might regret. So the magical question is, how can we do it better next time? How are we going to do this again? So this is an opportunity for us to learn and grow from this experience. Now, teach them to forgive themselves. This is a tricky one, because oftentimes we're really hard on ourselves. Now, why are we so hard on ourselves? Because we care. So we have this idea in our minds that in order to be responsible, you really need to beat on yourself nice and good. And if you are really hard on yourself, then you're going to be more, and you can fill in the blank. Productive, responsible, successful, knowledgeable, hardworking, whatever it might be. We have this idea that as long as we're very hard on ourselves, we will produce more. And nothing could be further from the truth. Because the harder you are on yourself, the more afraid you are to try new things. The harder you are on yourself, the less you learn from your mistakes, because you're afraid to make them. Because when you make your mistakes, they're really painful. And so who wants to go through that? So I might as well stay really safe, and I'll continue to do everything that I know, and I won't try anything new, because as long as I'm safe, I don't have to beat on myself. Right? So to teach your child to forgive themselves is the greatest gift that you can give your child. Greatest. More than being responsible. I used to think that being responsible was the greatest thing. So God only knows I had my hammer and I'm like, you're going to be responsible if it's the last thing I do. Nowadays, I know that if they're kind to themselves, they will be responsible. Okay, strategies for self-control. Explore expectations of self and others. Are they rigid or are they flexible? Can we have expectations and have them be flexible? Or do they have to be set in stone and in cement? Do our expectations have to be rigid? Can we create bendy expectations? Right? Flexible. We're going to try it again. I know that you can do this. Let's see how we can make it better. I'm going to try to control myself. Maybe you can try to control yourself here. Maybe we can help each other, right? Flexi. Now, why do we need to be flexible? Because the world out there is really hard. We don't need any more hard out there, right, than what is out there. So breathe deeply and often. Learn how to down-regulate. Now, what I mean by that is I'd like you guys to just get present to what it feels like in your body when you relax, right? And so the more present you are in your body to what it feels like when you relax, the more comfortable you are in your own body. So then you can tell when you get upregulated. Your children are the same way. Now, children are upregulated because of all the million things that we do, right? TV upregulates them, activities, sports activity upregulates them. They're constantly being stimulated all the time. So what helps them down-regulate? What calms them down? Is dinner time something that calms them down? Is going to bed a time that calms them down? Begin to look at the greatest gift and the greatest gem that you can give your kids is to teach them how to down-regulate. So slowing down, when do you experience a slowing down period? Does your family ever slow down? I know that there's lots of families that have lots of different activities, right? Like my weekends with 3 kids, oh my goodness, I'm like driving all over the place with their different activities, right? Like we need a weekend from our weekend. My husband and I are like, where's our chauffeur's hat? Create ways to build connections and emotional safety. Emotional connections are created, as I explained earlier, but another way is also through rituals. And what I mean by rituals are things that can be done repeatedly at the same time that create a repetitive experience for a child. Children need that repetition, especially when it's associated with love and connection. Oh, good. Okay, so creating connection. These are questions that create connection. These are more specific, targeted questions to help you guys build connection with your kids. So, did you feel loved today? Right? And you can also ask your spouse, you can ask pretty much anybody, and that transcends the question of how was your day, what did you learn in school? Right? Because you usually get, my day was good and I learned nothing. Right? So, did you feel loved today? Did you feel lonely today? Share with me, was there a time you needed help? And did you ask for help? Did you get the help you needed? What was it like for you to ask for help? Right, so these are very tiny questions that just begin to bridge the world between what's happening on the inside and what's happening on the outside. Now, every day, you have 4 chances to connect with your child. And it can be in 30 seconds or less, when you guys wake up in the morning, when you guys depart for the day, whether it be they leave for school or you leave for work, when you get together back at night, and when they go to bed. Those are 4 very solid, consistent opportunities to create connection, and they don't take a long time. And little rituals can be created specific to your family that creates connection. So kids can become present, that relationships need to be about connection. Okay, resources. So these are some of the books that I use. I kind of make up these PowerPoints like as a hodgepodge of stuff that I've learned. Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline by Dr. Becky Bailey. These books are on the back of your handouts as well. You don't have to copy them down. So Dr. Becky Bailey is a lady who creates emotionally intelligent schools. Like she creates what are called school families. So the classrooms can be connected in such a way to prevent bullying and exclusion of kids and things of that nature. But she also writes a series of parenting stuff. And another book that I haven't included in this list is called I Love You Rituals, which are different little activities to do with your kids that build connection. Redirecting Children's Behavior by Catherine Coles. What she talks about are misguided goals of misbehavior. If any of you have taken like the PEP courses, it's very similar to the stuff that they teach there. Nurture Shock is a book, a research book about what we've learned in the past or what we believe to be true in terms of our parenting practices is creating very anxious kids that have a hard time calming themselves down. And so it's about shifting the dynamic of parenting from a research-based perspective. Love Sense is a book by Sue Johnson that talks about the importance of attachment, but this one is much more about the anatomy of love and why it's so important for us to continue to nurture and foster love in relationships. Raising Your Spirited Child. This one is if you have a child that has an intense personality, it's based on the research of temperament, and so it breaks down the different components of temperament. I think there's 8 different characteristics. I do a talk on it, but I don't remember off the top of my head. The Raising Your Spirited Child gives you very specific strategies to deal and to manage and to parent with very specific personality traits. Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff. She is like the eminent researcher on the impact of self-compassion and how it affects your health, your relationships, how to begin to be more self-compassionate and change your relationship with yourself. And if you do have other questions, you're more than welcome to go on my website. I have like tons of books and resources there for you as well. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to look at my website. And so before we wrap up, I'm going to ask the question, right, from the challenge that I posed in the beginning to see, and you can just show your hands, how many of you have gotten at least one thing that you can do differently with your child by tonight's talk? Did I meet my goal? Yay, yay, yay. So thank you so much. You just made my night. I'm so grateful. As I say, this is my passion. This is what I really love to do. This is my dream, to speak to as many parents as possible, to help them change and transform their relationship with their kids. So does anybody have any questions for me? Silence, yes.
Question. You were talking about how you don't want to micromanage your child, basically, and so how do you handle it when they're not meeting your expectations with grades, for instance? Okay. You know this is very important, that you follow them into life. How do you handle that?
So how old is your child? 13. I got a 14-year-old, right? So first is your own anxiety, right? Like, how attached are you to his good grades? So the first question is, do you care more about his grades than he does, right? So for me, because I have a 14-year-old, and because I don't understand not doing well in school, like I don't understand it. Not only that I did well in school, I liked it. So for me, it was very difficult to even begin to teach my child to do well in school because I was never taught that. So it's a whole different experience when your child is so, let's say, off from what you expect them. So the first piece is, can you, for yourself, be calm enough with the fact that he doesn't get good grades so you can teach him? For me, it took me many years to learn that. It took many years for me personally. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and my mother never checked my homework, looked in my backpack, reminded me of anything. Never, never once. Like my mother, when she would get it's parent-teacher conference time, she would go like this, "Oh, I can't believe I have to go to your school, talk to your teacher." And I'm like, I promise you, they're going to say good things. Right? Like my mom was totally the opposite. She really didn't put that much emphasis on school. So in my head, I think that school is your responsibility. You should be able to do it. I'm not going to coddle you. I'm not going to be on top of you. It's your thing. So what I did with my oldest son is I just dropped him. I dropped him because I'm like, it's on you. I did it, and if I can do it, so can you. Now, I'm not saying that this is your case, but what I'm saying is if you look inside yourself and you say, okay, what is it that's about me that keeps me from meeting him where he is, right? So it's not about forcing him. It's about literally sitting next to him and saying, I don't know what your child's name is, but let's pretend his name is Peter. Peter, what's happening with your grades? Right? And so he will come up with whatever story. I don't like it. The teacher's boring. I forgot. What is it that you want me to do? You're always so mean. It can be like a million different things, right? So then the question here becomes, Peter, what do you want to do about your grades? Right? So you begin to put it on them. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have consequences, but there's a difference between you taking ownership and you creating consequences. You can create things that motivate. You can create a million different things. But the first piece is for you to be able to connect with him where he is. Can you deal with your own anxiety first? Second, once you deal with your own anxiety, can the two of you sit together and figure out how are we going to solve this? Can you tell me where you need help? Like my son, he gets so overwhelmed. And I find that this is something that happens often. He sees the big picture, he cannot break it down into smaller pieces. He has a really hard time breaking it down to smaller pieces. Now, obviously, I have a hard time breaking it down to smaller pieces too, because nobody ever broke it down to smaller pieces for me. So we have two people who don't know how to break it down to smaller pieces. So basically what we do with schoolwork is I push it onto him and he pushes back onto me. Well, no, I push it onto him and he just like pushes to the dog, right? So it's about you holding the space, this is important. This is important. This is important. But it's soft, steady, consistent. I'm not going away. This is important. This is important. This is important. Do you get that this is important? Right? And once you are calm, you can hold that there. But when you're anxious, what I do is I throw it at him. This is important. Don't you know? La 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 la. Not about that. You gotta hold it there. And when you hold it there, he comes, but you gotta be calm. Right? Does that make sense? Any other questions? Yes. Sure. Can you come up here, please? Please don't be embarrassed. And can you hold my microphone?
You might need to repeat the question because we can't hear that.
Can you hear?
I can hear you.
Okay. No, so I just...
Question. She's saying the question.
Oh, the question. The question is to show an example, if you could stand here to the side so these people could see, to show an example of an I love you ritual. So if you could come here, right? So let's say you have an anxious child, right? So you can grab their hand. This is in the I love you ritual book by Dr. Becky Bailey, right? So what you do is, here's their child's hand, right? And you're going to say 4 qualities that your child has, right? So let's say your child is stressed about taking an exam. I'm just making it up. So what is your name?
Lisa.
Lisa. Okay. So Lisa is really kind and patient. Lisa, you're really smart and helpful. Lisa, I know you have a big heart and you try your hardest. And Lisa, I know that you only want to do your best.
How do you know all this?
So I also know that sometimes you worry about how you do in school. So we're going to get this worry that you have about how you do in school, and these other parts of you are going to take care of you. So anytime you worry, just make sure that you remember that these other parts are here to take care of you. Right? So thank you, Lisa.
And that's something you would do the same routine daily?
Well, you can, so the question is, can you, no, come here. Binga, 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 binga. Okay, so the question was, would you do the same routine daily? Thank you so much. No, I'm good. You can, if the child likes repetition. You can come up with different stories for different reasons. And the interesting thing is that you would think that you would do this with little kids, right? But if I do this with my 9-year-old daughter, my 14-year-old son is right there, like, do it with me also, right? So it's really amazing how much, because we think that they're big, that they don't want that anymore. And that's not true. Right, so like another thing that you can do is you can say goodnight to different parts of their faces. I'm going to say goodnight to your eyebrow. I'm going to say goodnight to your other eyebrow. I'm going to say goodnight to your nose. I'm going to say goodnight to your cheek. And these are just things to slow down, to create that sweetness and that tenderness. That answer your question? Sure, thank you. Yes?
My situation is sort of like the opposite, but my child is way younger, he's 6. School is excellent. He loves school, but he cannot, he's a distractor, so he distracts others, and where his potential, where he could do even better, he's lacking because he doesn't like listen all the time, and he gets in the doghouse or whatever, you know.
Right. The thinking chair. Yes, to help them think better.
And I don't really know how to approach that because I'm thinking, okay, he's only 6, so
Yes.
Maybe he's allowed to do that, but then I want to curb it, you know.
You want to help him learn how to control himself while he's in the classroom.
Right.
Great. Okay, so the question is, how do I help my son who does really well in school, but he distracts other kids, right? So the first thing, and this is done kind of like in layers, kind of like the layers of a cake, right? So the first layer is you want to find out, how does it feel for him when he is in his chair at school? And if you can just kind of have a very casual conversation with him, what's it like for you to sit in that chair at school? Now, some kids might answer and give you like really great answers, and some kids are like, I don't know, or I don't like talking about my feelings, right? Like, don't ever ask me about my feelings because you don't belong there, right? So different kids will answer you in different ways. Now, one way, girls and boys talk differently. Girls are much more open with how they feel, boys are much more reserved, right? So if you want to get a boy to talk, the best place to talk with a boy or with a man is in the car. And the reason why that is that they're engaged in something and their eyes are focused on something, but their ears are open. So if you ever talk to your boy and he's fiddling or fidgeting with something, the best thing to do is to let him continue to fiddle with that. Oftentimes parents will be like, look at me, take that away, you're not focusing on what I'm saying. And for men, eye contact and a conversation is threatening. Now, I could tell you from the neurological perspective is because when we were cave people, eye contact to a man meant battle. It meant war. We're going to fight. For women, eye contact means friends. We're going to make friends. We can invite. This person is looking at us. So neurologically, we're wired differently. So to have a conversation with your son about how he feels, you may want to start in the car. 1. 2, once you get him talking about how he feels, you might be successful or you might not. You might use yourself as an example that sometimes you feel fidgety, or you feel bored, or you can't sit still. And so you may want to kind of fish and say, I wonder if you feel that way too, right? So you're fishing for some commiseration, I guess would be the word, right? Like, does he feel the same? And so then usually that opens up a conversation like, yes, I feel like that at school sometimes when I do X, Y, and Z. And so then you want to ask, what's that like for you? Or if you want to keep it simpler, what's that like on the inside? So then the next question would be, do you know something that would make you feel better? And they might say yes, or they might say no. And so you say, you know, I learned something new, and I'm thinking that maybe we could try it. And so the new thing that you learned is how to breathe. And so we're going to try to take 3 deep breaths together. Right? And so then when you take these 3 deep breaths together, you're going to ask him, what's it like for him? Now, it might be too much attention on him, or that conversation might be too long by this time, or he might be onto something else. So if it does get to be too much, you drop it, and then you bring it up at another time. If he's still engaged, but he doesn't want to answer, you may want to share what's it like for you. Now, this conversation, as I said, there are layers in the sense that you might need to visit this place several times before they are comfortable in having these kinds of conversations, right? So like, for example, when I have families that come into my office, the kids usually are like all over the place, and I have toys, and so they touch all the toys, and they have the feet on the couch, and the parents are having a heart attack, and oh my God, I'm so sorry, get your feet on the couch, you're not supposed to do that, and sit still, right? And so the reason why that is that it's because they're uncomfortable. And I need to give them a few sessions to settle in. And once they settle into all of us being together and having conversations about how we feel, things just begin to calm down. But we need to have that time to kind of settle. Our kids aren't used to talking about their feelings. Heck, we're not used to talking about our feelings. We live our lives like 1,000 miles per hour. So the key to help your son is to help him learn how to self-regulate. How does he calm down? Breathing can be one of them. I know that there's some classrooms that have that elastic chair that you get at Target that has that elastic so they can actually go and expend some energy on this bouncing chair that looks like a basketball hoop net. I'm not sure if you've seen it, made out of elastic, right? So there's different techniques that you can use to help him kind of get rid of that energy. I don't know if it's energy because he just has a lot of it, or it might be anxious energy, or it might be because he's bored. But the key, the beginning, especially because he's young, is to help him notice that this is something that he needs to take care of, right? Like it's something that he's got to begin to notice. Otherwise, like in the future, it can work against him. Any other questions? Yes.
I know the focus here is on school-age children, but I have a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. Do you have any suggestions for sort of starting early?
Okay, so interesting, right? The 4-year-old, you want to help them verbalize how they feel, right? So for little kids under the age of 7, there's basically 4 feelings. There's mad, glad, sad, and scared. Those are the 4 feelings for little kids. So if you can just help them articulate those 4 feelings, that'd be really great. For the 2-year-old, you want to help them actually put words to what they want, right? Because they're young and they're little. Now, the key here is a little piece that I didn't talk about, which is called your emotional field, right? And your emotional field is kind of like that feeling that's created inside your house that's shared by everyone. Like when somebody else walks in your house, what does your house feel like? What's the energy inside your house? Now, we all carry this emotional field. We have this emotional field at work. We share it with our coworkers. We share it with our friends. We share it with our own kids and in our family, right? So you want to kind of be mindful because kids respond a lot more to that emotional field than to any words that you give. And so if your emotional field feels very rigid or feels depleted or feels very heavy, there might be something that needs to be addressed. And usually it's inside ourselves, right? Like how is it that we can create greater fluidity? Relationships are about back and forth. Think of it this way. I throw you the ball, you throw it back to me. I throw you the ball, you throw it back to me. So as long as you can begin to create that back and forthness, and doesn't mean that it's perfect, doesn't mean that you're always connected, it doesn't mean that they don't fight, but when they fight, how do we restore that back and forthness? How is it that we restore the rhythm of the relationship? Good? Yes?
The question here was at what age is it appropriate to give the child that responsibility for their own grades? Say, I can help you, but you need to take ownership.
At what age is it appropriate to give the child their own responsibility for their grades?
In general, because you were saying that you have to be able to say to them, look, it's up to you, you need to be responsible, I can help you, but at what age is that?
Good question. See, when they're younger, I find that they're much more invested and participatory in the whole school work scenario. It's when they get older. You see, what happens is when they're like in middle school and in high school, when they're given greater responsibility, the question here becomes, what is your relationship to responsibility? So I would start having those conversations probably more towards middle school, but also, like for example, the first year of middle school, it's a really big transition from elementary school to middle school. So they're beginning to learn how to take care of themselves. And so this is the piece to begin to feel comfortable with, are they gonna make mistakes? And what happens when they make mistakes? Hello? So to answer your question, I would say around middle school, but it really depends on each child because certain kids need more structure and other kids need less. Sure. Any other questions? So I do have I'm sorry, yes.
Ideas about portfolios.
Yes. Great question. So one, you want to be present to what helps them stay focused. right? So kids learn from different perspectives, and what I mean by that is certain kids are really great visual learners, certain kids are very kinesthetic learners, like they need to touch it, and other kids learn really well by a teacher speaking in front of the classroom, right? Like, so kids absorb information in different ways. So if you can first be present to how does your child learn best? Now, there are questions, and you can even go online to, if you Google what kind of learner is my child, there's questions that can help you assess that. Then second is you want to create breaks so they can feel like their focus has an end. Because what happens is, if there's the expectation that you're going to be able to do this whole activity because I can do it, so I don't know why you wouldn't be able to do it, right? Like, we oftentimes have that. We don't understand because our kids think differently than we do, right? So to be able to create the steps that are necessary to help them break it down into smaller pieces. 2. 3, you want to ask them what helps them. And to just be present with them because you don't know either. So we're kind of discovering this together. So when you sit and you ask them, how is it that you can, what helps you, then you and your child are together and the problem is over there. Right, so those are kind of just like 3 little steps to kind of help them begin to take ownership that this focus is something that they need to focus on, address. Any other questions? Yes?
When you were talking about sort of the immunity that kids sort of grow into, some kids can grow into, where you are unconditional love, and I'm speaking here about that third and youngest child who is, great sports, his sisters, but he feels that sort of, he's more ungrateful. I want to hear more about how you draw, how you pull that child back in to understand your unconditional love. And you give us lots of great examples here in terms of being present and all that.
Great question. I'm so glad you're bringing that. So the question is how to pull in a child that doesn't feel that unconditional love. Especially if you have 3 kids, usually there's 2 of them that are together and then there's a 3rd child that's kind of left out. This is actually, I do a whole other talk on this, which is the whole idea of how kids' behaviors impact the rest of the family. There's an absence of acknowledgement, presence, and even awareness that this exists. And what I mean by that is, because we are so individually focused, and because we really focus on independence, we want our kids to be independent, we want our kids to be self-sufficient, we want our kids to do the very best, the interdependency component has kind of like fallen off the bus, right? So the key here is in order to, when your family is together, could you have a conversation of what does it feel like to be part of this family? What's the experience of being in this family? And if you could just open the conversation with that and begin to explore what are things that we can do that creates inclusion. Right? Because what happens, and I've had this experience in my own family as well, which is one child gets an idea stuck in their head that they are X, Y, and Z, and you can do a million things to try to change that idea, and it doesn't change. I am the, and you can fill in the blank, I am the dumb one, I am the smart one, I am the sporty one, I am your favorite child, I am, like, they create their own identities. And isn't that right, Mom, that I'm your favorite? Right? So the key here is to begin to have conversations of like, with everybody together, how do you think this other sibling feels when you say that? What do you think it's like for these other people? Or I will share with you what it's like for me when da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Show me what would help you feel like you're unconditionally loved. Right? So like oftentimes I'll find couples, right, that the wife will complain, my husband doesn't do enough for me. But then when I ask the wife, what does enough look like? She can't tell me what that looks like. So how is it that he's going to fill up a bucket that has no shape, right? Until the bucket has a shape, the needs cannot be met. And then you're just left empty, right? So it's about helping your kids shape their bucket so they can actually receive the love when they get it. Any other questions? Yes.
You said your mother
Yes.
told you to do homework and doing acting stuff. But how you can make your child motivate study, doing homework themselves? In my case, I always sit down next to my son, he's 8 years old, doing the homework, make sure he's doing. He got a lot of homework from school and other second language. So he has a lot of homework. So I make sure sit down next to him, doing homework. This is right, this is wrong, making corrections. You're suggesting not to do it?
No. Especially at a young age, you should sit next to him and help him, right? And especially because he has a lot of homework. Where I'm suggesting is, are you taking responsibility for, and it can be homework or it can be self-control, it can be something that belongs to them. At the age of 8, with the amount of stuff that he's doing, he needs your support. If you were to leave him, it's like he's drowning, right? It's like he's underneath this massive homework and it's just like, how do I manage all of this? So your support will help him through. What I intended to share earlier is, can you be responsible? Can you control how your child behaves? And the answer to that is no, you cannot. What you can do is you can hold them accountable. You can teach them this behavior is not appropriate, but you cannot control it. Because if you control it, you're going to drive yourself crazy. That's the difference. Do you see the difference between the two? You can support them, but if you begin to take ownership for how they feel, that's when it doesn't work. Because later on, they're just going to push you away. That make sense? Yes.
Another question, you mentioned punishment.
Yes.
How about giving like work to do, like for example, you do this, you can let's play a game,
Right.
20 minutes, or ice cream.
Well, so the question here is, what motivates your child, right? Like to ask him, is this something that you would like? Like we work hard now and then we get to play a game later, right? So I get a little weary, concerned about rewarding with food, just because I wouldn't want to associate that, every time you do something good and then you're going to get an ice cream and then before you know it, he's like eating a whole gallon of ice cream, right? But if you do it once in a while, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But if you do it all the time, then food stops being food and it starts being something else. And that's a little scary. But if you create incentives, that's wonderful because you're creating a structure and he can look for something forward. Now the question is the incentive, is the reward something that makes you happy or is it something that they want, right? So just to begin to have the conversation of what motivates him and what is it that he would like to do so the two of you can work at this together. Sure. Any other questions? Yes.
So, here's what you say, and you don't want to feel angry, so what you calm down something slowly and then but then you just say,
He's going to do it again.
and then you again try to control yourself, at some point, after a number of times, and then you get a tour,
Right.
you're very angry.
I know. Isn't that about parenting? Like, doesn't that drive you crazy? It drives me crazy. Like, how many times do I have to tell you the same thing?
We hope that you keep calming down and keep doing it repeatedly and basically go and work out, or
No, because if you notice, you calm down, you tell him that what he did was wrong, I won't do it again, and then he does it again. If he's doing it again, obviously something's not working. So the calm down part is really great. The second part is like, I notice that this is happening over and over again. What's going on here? Like, what's happening? What needs to change? Right? So like, for example, I have a dog, and it's my kid's responsibility to let the dog out and to walk the dog, and the dog pees and poops inside the house like all the time, right? So like, it's been like a big deal because poor dog, and I love my dog, and the dog needs to go outside. And so how is it that I teach my children empathy when I literally want to strangle each one of them? Right? So, because I feel bad for the dog, and it's not fair for the dog. So it's about creating ownership. If you do not have ownership of the problem, you don't solve it. And what I mean by that, by ownership, is, have you ever driven in a city that you're not familiar with? If you're the driver, you will learn the streets. Maybe it might take you a little time, but you'll learn it. If you're the passenger, you have no idea where you went. You just know that they took me to this restaurant and then I went back to my aunt's house. How we got there, how we got back, I have no idea. Right? You need to be able to create a strategy, and I'm sure that you're smart enough to figure this one out, that puts your child in the driver's seat so they can learn the road. You can be sitting next to them, but if they're not in the driver's seat, you're going to be repeating yourself 100 times, and it's going to drive you insane. And then the calm thing is going to go out the window, because by literally the 5th time, I'm a lunatic. So the language that I've implemented in my house, like for example with cleaning or with the dog, it is not an I problem, it's a we problem. And a we problem is all of our problem. And so how is it that all of us are going to solve this problem? Right? So we all take ownership of this. I used to walk into my house, and if my house was a mess, I would have a heart attack because I would think I have to clean this up. And then I'd get all resentful and angry because it's like, it's not fair that I'm the person who needs to clean all this stuff up, and I'd just be like, bleh, right? It's not a me problem. It's a we problem. We all are responsible for this. So now instead of me just vomiting my anger onto everybody, I say very calmly, this house is a mess. How are we going to clean it up? What are we going to do to fix this? And literally, in 6 minutes or less, my house is clean. Whereas like I would have been really bitter and resentful because my anger would have lasted like all day. And if my husband's not nice to me at night, it lasts till the next day too. Because you know something, somebody's got to pay for this. Any other questions? Yes?
I don't say that because I always say, I joke with my husband, everybody don't know this.
Yes.
And Granny used to get upset. She would say, yeah, no, that's how I am. No.
Yes.
And I'm so revved up and so wound up that by the time I go to bed, I feel like anger.
Yes.
Why am I yelling at her?
Yes.
So I'll try to take things in part. So it's an abuse that, home is one thing, children's education, husband is another. It should be separated, not one long way from it. That's what's my stress.
Yes, well, because we begin to take ownership of stuff that doesn't belong to us. And that is the gasoline that builds resentment. So if ever you feel resentment, it's because you're taking on stuff that doesn't belong to you. So you need to take a moment and say, what am I carrying that doesn't belong to me? And then you give it back to the respective people. Any other questions?
One more if you have, because we have to be mindful of it.
Of course, of course.
Okay, one last question, and we're done. Or no?
Okay, well, I do have testimonials. If you could please fill them out. I take this very seriously. I read your comments and your feedbacks to improve my talks. As I said earlier, my goal is to at least impart some nugget of information that when you leave here tonight, you will do something different with your child.
And also, there is a feedback form for us. We organize the Parent Academy, so we would like to hear from you. And we always want to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So grateful.